Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us from all around the world. I am pleased to welcome our speaker, Frances Ho. Frances is the managing director at Walden Catalyst Ventures, a deep technology-focused early-stage venture capital firm. Immediately prior, Frances was Senior Vice President, Managing Director, and co-head of Samsung Catalyst Fund, a $500 million evergreen corporate venture capital vehicle for Samsung. Frances has a background in venture capital investment, business development, strategy consulting, marketing, and engineering, with extensive operating experience in multiple industries, including semiconductors, optics, networking, and storage. Prior to Samsung, he was vice president of strategic marketing at Inphi Corporation and has held roles at McKinsey and Company, JP Morgan Partners, and O&I Systems. Frances holds a PhD in physics from Stanford University, where he was a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellow, and holds an MS in Applied Physics and a BS in Physics from the California Institute of Technology. Frances holds 7 U.S. patents related to semiconductor technologies. In 2020, recently, Frances was honored by the Global Corporate Venturing Organization as number 5 on its annual Power List of corporate venture capital investors worldwide. Frances, welcome. He's here to discuss how to crystallize your vision and share it with the world. So please type your questions in chat, and then we're going to open up the floor in the last 10 minutes to field your questions. Frances, welcome. Please take it away.
Thank you so much, Victoria. It's great to have a chance to talk to all of you, I guess probably in many different time zones. So thank you for getting up early or staying up late if you're in some different time zone. I took a quick look at the finalists, and it's amazing. It's so great to have so many exciting companies from really literally around the world that are going to change our world. And then also notice that some of the companies I actually know from before. I know some of you, so it'd be great to have a chance to meet more of you. This is really hopefully going to be very interactive. I'd love to share some of my ideas. I think there's many things that you guys will teach me. So maybe it can be an interactive discussion. I'll kick it off with some ideas. I have some slides prepared, and look forward to that. So let me share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, so to begin with, this is the journey, right? So I think you all know about this journey. You have been going on it. You've started on it for a while now. It's about expanding from yourself to reach the stakeholders. You started with this amazing idea that inspired you to change the world. It was so exciting, you couldn't stop thinking about it. You had to go from there to go beyond yourself to reach the key stakeholders. So these are, of course, your team members, your investors, your customers, your ecosystem, and it never ends, right? Because things keep changing. No matter how early or how late your business is, it never ends. So that's the fun of it. I think that's what I think we're talking about today. So when we talk about crystallizing your vision, what is it that we need to crystallize? There are, of course, many things, but a few things that we can talk about today. One is, of course, the overall story and strategy, why you exist and why people should care. At some point, you need to talk about the concrete business plan to get funded. And that keeps changing, right? There's something about the early stage plan, which is exciting, but the same idea presented, 2 years later is not going to cut it, right? So it keeps changing, keeps evolving. And then always, it's about what products and services, what to do. And of course, as you know, maybe just as important, what not to do. So these are some of the things that need to be crystallized. And so as with anything that's about communications, you can imagine it's all about the stakeholders, your audience, understanding who the stakeholders are, understanding the perspectives of these diverse stakeholders. So that includes starting with yourself, right? And your team, your founding team, your management team. It includes your investors. That keeps evolving. And the investors will have different motivations depending on when they come in. The early stage, versus kind of growth stage versus, later at some point maybe public investors, right? And then of course the market, the customers ecosystem, that's constant struggle. I don't know of any company that goes from small to big without having very major pivots and near-death experience. I've been in, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 companies. Every single one has had one or more near-death experiences. So this is not just when you get started, it's always kind of reinventing yourself at critical juncture. So it's about these stakeholders. And so if I start with understanding yourself and your team, just kind of very gross simplification, of course, is more complex than this, but as a construct, we can think of two kinds of founders, right? There are the tech founders. Myself was one of those, for example. These are very techies, engineering centric folks. They look around the world, they see something they can, improve. They want to do something and change and invent something. So you got a great invention, a great new amazing invention. They're searching for a way to use it, and you're convinced it's going to benefit the world, and you have to articulate why. Why is it important? Why is it that it's going to be helpful? And the second kind of founder, on the kind of the opposite extreme, is sort of the market need founder, for want of a better word. So this is the type of person who maybe is not a techie, but is very sensitive to what people's needs are, what is wrong with the world. They maybe have a very global view of things. So they see some kind of urgent problem and want to find the right solution to that. And it turns out that, both of these have strengths and weaknesses, and the weaknesses lead to different blind spots and challenges. We'll talk more about that. So talking about blind spots and challenges on the tech founder side, the blind spot is the invention is so cool, right? It's like amazing. So you fall in love with the invention, and you maybe obsess a little bit too much about the what and how, and maybe not enough about the why. Like, why do customers need this? And this is always a challenge, by the way. Obviously, in the beginning of your company, but even later on, I can guarantee you, I've seen it everywhere. Because the market keeps changing, sometimes you lean too much on your strength. So the example that comes to mind is recently we've been seeing a lot of AI accelerator chips, right? So these are different AI workloads have to run, whether in the cloud, on the edge, and you want to make it run faster with lower power, higher performance. So this accelerator chip that runs AI is a very popular company to start these days. And so what you see is that they have some very cool idea to make things better, faster, but very commonly, they don't really think about the total solution. And really, this is like everything that matters you should think about, because for you to get into the market, for customers to use you instead of their trusted current solution, which may be not as good, but why should they change? And there's many, many reasons why they don't want to change. So for this kind of founder, the difficult part often is to understand enough about what customers really care about, who are very different people from yourself, and figure out what it is that can help them. So in the AI accelerator case, it's probably things like the software stack, the workflow, the ecosystem support, the vertical specialization, and so on. But of course, this example applies to many, many sectors, whether you're ag tech or transportation or whatever, right? The second type of founder, the market need founder, has a completely different set of strengths and weaknesses. So the weakness, the blind spot could be this person sees very clearly what's wrong, right? They have a very keen sense for what's missing in the big picture or some big hole somewhere, and they want to fix it. And they're good at explaining what's wrong, but often not enough details on how to achieve this incredible user experience. And the challenge is that when we're talking about these big, UN 17 SDG, these big sustainability goals, for example, it often is not a secret that there's something wrong. You're not trying to find a very, very niche, small thing in a deep value chain. Often you're trying to solve a big problem. So this market that you're going after is often very well known, and there's like a ton of competition. And so for customers, for investors, for team members to evaluate whether to join you or to do something else, they need to understand more details. And the weakness here can be because you're not as engineering centric, you don't think through the details of how as much, and therefore you have some challenges there. So in fact, what I just talked about, which is thinking about the details about the stakeholders ecosystem, I think that is a big issue for probably all founders and all companies at all stages. And the thing here is you have to understand how the stakeholders ecosystems will react. Typically in the companies that are on this call, for example, you are targeting mature industries typically. You're not going after a customer set that didn't exist before. So because of that, there's a whole established ecosystem of behavior, incentives, and so on. So you have to understand how do you create the incentives to make all of the key holders take action and bet on you, a relatively risky new company, right? And so this is where you will need a lot of details on how you're going to build this, the detailed implementation, so you can think through what will be all the gotchas that will hit you along the way. Try to anticipate them versus react to them, which you'll have to do. You have to react a lot, but you want to anticipate as much as possible. And I think this is the key to the successful companies that can continue to kind of improve themselves and build a very strongly differentiated product and service. The example I want to give is maybe take healthcare. So healthcare is maybe one of the extreme examples of very large vertical, trillions of dollars. It is extremely mature. Healthcare has been around as long as mankind has been around. And so now in the US anyway, where I understand the market better, there's these stakeholders are very kind of different. There's the patient, the provider, the insurer, the payer. There's pharma who make the drugs. There's med tech companies that make the devices. And then there's all these services companies around that, and there's regulators. So all these stakeholders, they have different incentives and disincentives. So if you have an idea, a common idea is to remove friction from the patient journey. It sounds like a great idea, right? And there's so many places to look for friction in the patient journey, at least in the US healthcare system. But you have to think about what the other stakeholders, like the doctors, the nurses, the insurers, the health IT providers who wrote the software that's already installed there, the regulators from FDA and so on, how will they react to your idea? And this is where it's very, very challenging. And even very informed people who are experts about the industry have blind spots. And so that's where you have to kind of keep reacting, keep learning, keep pivoting if you have a new idea. The other extreme in the healthcare case is maybe a technology innovation, let's say a new test, a new diagnostic test, right? That is even more challenging because there it's guaranteed that at least some of your team members are very kind of tech centric, very engineering centric, because the whole point is about the technology. So that's a classic example of a company type that it needs to find the right kind of path to market because it needs to navigate this existing set of stakeholders who have existing tests and services which are not as good, but they're used to it. So how to navigate that is always the challenge. So this is maybe the universal problem for all of you. Okay. So changing topics a little bit, let's talk about investors and raising money and how to convince them to take your meetings and give you the funding and so on. And there's of course so many things to talk about here. We don't have time for that. We can have different discussions later. But I want to point out one thing which I do see quite a bit, which is there is a confusion often on the part of the entrepreneur about why investors are there, right? I mean, you're there because you have this great idea. You need to get it into market. You have this pain you have to solve, right? The investors are not there for that, right? The investors are there because they're managing often their LPs, limited partners money, right? They need to make great returns for their investors, or maybe some investors are investing for social good. So they have some kind of desire to take their limited resources and make the maximum amount of change, whether it's profit or benefit to society. So that's how they're trying to optimize that. So the question for the investor is, why should they place place one of their bets in your startup versus all the other ideas that are possible. Why is this one the best place, and not just for solving this startup's market problems, but the best idea out of everything else that's out there? So don't confuse that. So if you want to get the investor excited, you start with how great this is for that specific pain point, why that's important, and so on. But you have to end up with, hey, this is a winning solution and startup, whether it's a concept or much more mature business. This is a winning business that you need to invest in because you will make a great return and make a great impact. And sometimes I get into almost like debates with the founders about, hey, don't you see why this is so much better than the existing solution? And in the end, it doesn't matter for the investor. So this is something that I sort of thought I wanted to highlight here. Okay, and I think just to sum up, many different things to talk about, but maybe the key commonality is thinking about the perspectives of all the key stakeholders. They're very different. They evolve all the time as you get into the market, as you have growth in different stages. Of course, as you know, the key is get feedback from experienced advisors you trust, from great investors, and especially the customers and the market and the ecosystem. And the challenge is to keep seeking out the toughest but yet constructive, not just tough but also constructive criticism, and keep refining and keep your ego out of this. So those are some ideas. Would love to have a discussion with you guys. I think I mute Victoria.
Great. Great. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Francis. So let's open up the floor to questions. If you want to type your questions in chat, or just raise your hand and we're going to fill your questions. How about this, Francis? You talk a little bit about your focus of your new fund, and what are some of the type of companies that you're looking for right now?
Yeah, thank you. It's always great to talk about what we're excited about. So, as you mentioned in the beginning, Walden Catalyst Ventures is a deep tech fund. We're a global fund. So we have actively invested in offices in North America, in Europe, and in Israel, and always looking at ideas outside those regions also. We typically invest in early stage, and what that means for us is sort of like when the idea is being fleshed out to some detail enough so that you're about to create a product or service and about to engage with customers. And if you go beyond that, that's also interesting for us. We have kind of different criteria. We can also go very late in some stages, in some cases. Our sectors are basically deep tech focused, and what we mean by that, one way to think about that is things that are hard to copy. So a nice deep tech company is if you announce to the world, I'm going to solve this problem, and let's say something about your solution. Like, good luck to the next guy who tries to copy you without lots of preparation. Deep tech is kind of one definition could be the way to do it is quite difficult, or maybe it needs a lot of preparation or lots of something that requires years and years of work in advance. And so we'd like to come in at the right time to help accelerate that. Now, deep tech ends up for us these days, of course, very much about data. So we also explicitly look at data as an accelerator. And that's nice because it lets you go across different verticals. So we look for verticals where data is making a big impact, and it can be the AI kind of data, but it's not just about hype and AI. It's about something in the nature of the business that's changing, and data is kind of driving that. And if so, we want to invest either in the infrastructure that delivers the data, or maybe the end services that are kind of starting to grow and getting the incumbents very scared, and those kind of companies. So we want to invest in those kind of companies. So we end up investing in everything from, let's say, quantum computing to AI chips, as I discussed, to cloud and different middleware, DevOps, MLOps kind of software, to the end services market, such as healthcare, mobility, insurtech, fintech, and looking more and more at ideas in what I'm calling digital biology, which is taking biology and injecting data to that. And I mean, the reason we have vaccines today within like 12 months when we started was because of digital biology. So that's very, very exciting also. Those are some of the main areas.
Great. And I do have a question in chat. Would you recommend creating different pitch decks for different stakeholders?
Absolutely. Yes. So uh, if I interpret the question broadly, of course you're gonna have different pitch decks for your customers, right? That's like a very different one versus your investor. But your stakeholders start with yourself, right? So you're the CEO, you have a staff meeting with your direct reports. You do that once a week, a few times a month, whatever. You have some kind of regular updates with your team. If it's a small team, it's not so formal. If it's a global team, you schedule something, let's say once a month, all hands. You have board meetings with your investors, right? And you have pitch decks for new investors. Each of this is a pitch deck. Don't get confused, right? It's about keeping people motivated and aligned and communicating. So very different. Clearly, every one of these stakeholders have very different cares and wants. So definitely recommend thinking through that and what you want to tell each stakeholder.
And Francis, how do you balance between a founder's vision and his idealism with investors' urge for growth and foreseeable returns?
Yeah, that's a great one. Well, given the topic of this call, right, which is Extreme Tech Challenge, your vision pretty much, I think, is something big, to make the world better. So I think the first answer is pick a vision that is targeting a big, big need. There's a saying that goes something like a big TAM, a big market size cures many evils. And the reason is that you are going to make mistakes and the market's going to change. So you're going to have to pivot. So even if you have a great idea, you're going to have to pivot. And the market being large gives you time and money to make the pivot. So first thing is you want to target a big problem. And then, so you want to then find investors who have the right alignment with you, who are not in it to, make a quick return or something. And you want to find investments at the stage that you're raising money at, who are going to help you and will have the patience for you to reach the goals that are in alignment with their needs and your needs. So it's very careful thinking, I think, about where you go and which investors you choose to take money from.
That's great. So we're at time right now. So I want to thank Francis. I want to thank all of you, Francis, particularly for joining today and share your wise counsel. As you mentioned, the entrepreneur journey is long and there are different challenges at different points. And I want to encourage all of the startups on the call to connect with Francis. And I want to particularly appreciate your support for the Extreme Tech Challenge community. So thank you all. And
Thank you. Congratulations to all of you also. It's so exciting to see all this.
great. More to come, Francis. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
We'll see you at the next call.
Thank you.
Bye.